The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there, while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Jesus said to his disciples later on, "Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with great joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while, and when trouble or persecution arises on account of that word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. The Gospel of the Lord." Those of you who know, who have heard this before, we bought an old grad student house, and we've been gradually fixing it up. And one of the things about this house was that when we got here, there were all these flower beds, but they were just mulch. There were a couple of plants, like some hostas in full sun, and if you don't know, like hostas are actually shade plants, and some daylilies in shade, and daylilies are plants that need sunlight, so nothing grew very well, and eventually we decided that we were going to rip it all out and keep the shape of the beds, but otherwise take everything out. So particularly last year, I set about taking out all this old landscaping fabric, and dumping the mulch back into the soil to start getting that process going again. And underneath the landscaping fabric, what I found was like a very clayey soil. And it was so full of clay that my son Andrew, who was 5 at the time, could actually make little animals out of it and then let them dry in the sun. It was so clayey that if it got wet, it was really slippery. And I found out that you could actually amend the soil by putting sand and compost in it, and that helped a lot. But the soil still has a long way to go before it's nourishing. So one of the plants that I planted last year, a red twig dogwood, which is a native plant to this area, and I've had a lot of really good luck with native plants growing, it like mysteriously died this spring. And so I bought a plant to replace it. I was at a nursery and I saw this really pretty plant with fragrant white flowers. It's called a mock orange. And I decided I'd take a chance. And I put it in, and for about a week, it looked really nice in the same spot, not having done anything to the soil, right? And then after about a week, the leaves started to wilt and parts of the plant died off. It's not quite dead yet, but the jury is still out on whether it will actually survive. And now that I think about it, I think I was kind of dumb to not actually, at least take a bunch of the soil out and put compost in. I just literally took the dead plant out and put a new one in the same place without doing anything. And the fact is, instead of just putting a new plant in there, I really should have at the very least done a little bit of something, or had the soil tested or something to try to figure out what's wrong with the soil. The plants around that spot seem to be doing just fine, but for whatever reason, there is perhaps something there in that soil that means those plants the ones that I planted anyway and tried, are simply not going to survive there. While I haven't succeeded at growing every single thing I've tried to grow, I've had pretty good success just by making sure plants are in the type of soil they're supposed to be in, well drained or sandy or any, because no plant will tell you that you should put it in clay soil, and that they're getting the right amount of sun. But I'm not so used to having my efforts fail so spectacularly with two different plants in the same spot. The thing is, if this new plant, the mock orange, actually really dies, I will either need to just avoid that spot for a while or get the soil tested or take a bunch of soil out from that spot and replace it, but definitely not put it anywhere near where I want things to grow. In any case, it's going to take some work. The parable of the sower is often interpreted to be about the seeds, the word, but in this time and place, I'm thinking we need to focus a lot more on the soil. And I think there are two analogies here for the soil: the church and us. Rich soil requires death and rebirth. Like I said, when we moved in, all the flower beds were covered with landscaping fabric and mulch and not many plants. For years, the soil had been denied that natural cycle of death and rebirth that leads to healthy, rich soil. Dead leaves decaying and becoming nutrients for new life. When we ripped all that fabric out, I found worms trapped in the fibers and a gray, clayey soil that would just drown any plants that wanted to try to grow because clay just traps water. I got some advice, and I learned that I needed to add sand to the clay to break it up, as well as compost. There wasn't a lack of hope. There was just work that needed to be done. That dead soil wasn't ready for new life yet. It had been behind a barrier for way too long. That barrier had made maintenance easy and made things look uniform and made things look at least kind of pretty, but it wasn't alive. And ripping it up was hard, dirty work. What kinds of barriers do we need to lift in order for these seeds of God's kingdom to fall on rich soil? What kinds of things look pretty or keep things easy but act as a barrier to the natural cycles of death and new life that lead to strong roots and strong faith? Growth is dangerous, but the seeds of our faith will be able to stretch more freely towards the sun if that faith is firmly rooted in good soil. The good news, of course, is that even if we've had barriers up for a long time, even if we've allowed that soil to grow rocky or hardened, we can do the hard, dirty work of pulling back the barrier, and soil can always be amended. It's important to note that no one undertakes the trouble of all that work without a strong sense of hope that things can be different and that new life will take root. And the seeds that fall on that soil, even if they grow and die and grow again, they are part of a cycle that leads to new life, to resurrection. Amen.